Hello everyone, this is Sarfraz from Aristotle Prep and we are looking at passage 16 from the OG 13 RC chapter. This has questions 75 to 83, that is 9 questions, which is too many questions as I said in my introductory lecture. You will never have a passage on the GMAT with more than 4 questions. So, but you can't help it because it's an OG passage, you have to attempt it, you have to try it. But keep in mind that to answer 9 questions, you have to understand the passage in much more detail than you would have to if there were only 4 questions from this passage. Anyway, so as always, we will first read the passage. It's apparently a difficult passage. So I will read it. I will explain it to you the way I would have understood it had I been doing it myself. Then we will try to predict the purpose of the passage and then attempt questions. The first sentence of the passage is always very, very important. It says, "It was once believed that the brain was independent of metabolic processes occurring elsewhere in the body." The moment I read "it was once believed," rest assured, eventually it was proved wrong. So this much experience will tell you, or as you do more and more passages, that if the sentence says, "it was once thought XYZ," it means later on that was definitely proved wrong. So coming back, it was once believed that the brain was independent of metabolic processes occurring elsewhere in the body. In recent studies, however, see the contrast comes in. We have discovered that the production of and release in brain neurons of the neurotransmitter serotonin. Neurotransmitters are compounds that neurons use to transmit signals to other cells, whatever that means, depend directly on the food that the body processes. So, read it again. In recent studies, we have discovered that the production and release of serotonin depends directly on the food that the body processes. So then the brain is not or may not be independent of metabolic processes in the body because something in the brain is actually depending on what's happening in the body. That's basically the first paragraph for you. And I have no idea what's going to happen next because nothing in the first paragraph gives me any inkling as to what to expect next. But I do know it'll have something to do with the brain and metabolic processes and something on those lines. The first sentence of the second paragraph says, "Our first studies sought to determine whether the increase in serotonin observed in rats given a large injection of the amino acid tryptophan might also occur after rats ate meals that change tryptophan levels in the blood." Okay, it's basically talking about some studies connected to what we read about serotonin depending on the food the body processes. Some experiment which had been done on rats. So I'm just reading. By the time I reach the end of the second paragraph, I hopefully would have understood what is broadly happening in this paragraph. So reading on, we found that immediately after the rats began to eat, parallel elevations occurred in blood tryptophan, brain tryptophan, and brain serotonin levels. I think it just shows the connection between food and brain activity. These findings suggested that the production and release of serotonin in brain neurons were normally coupled with blood tryptophan increases. Okay, fine. In later studies, we found that injecting insulin into a rat's bloodstream also caused parallel elevations in blood and brain tryptophan levels and in serotonin levels. We then decided to see whether the secretion of the animal's own insulin similarly affected serotonin production. We gave the rats a carbohydrate containing meal that we knew would elicit insulin secretion, as we had hypothesized the blood tryptophan level and the concentrations of tryptophan and of serotonin in the brain increased after the meal. Don't let all this tryptophan and serotonin confuse you. Don't lose sight of the bigger picture, which is all that's happening in the second paragraph is it is giving you examples from experiments conducted on rats to show that there is a connection between what's happening in the body with what's happening in the brain. They gave the rats insulin and some release of some chemical happened in the brain. They again allowed the rats to naturally secrete insulin and yet the release happened in the brain. So all basically is happening in the second paragraph is it's giving you examples to show that yes, there is definitely a connection between body activity or what's happening in different parts of the body with what's happening in the brain. That's all that's there in the second paragraph because it's a very complex paragraph. If you actually get into tryptophan and serotonin and this and that, you'll get totally confused. So on such paragraphs, it helps to focus on the bigger picture and to tell yourself, I'm not even trying to understand the details, as I kept saying. And I still don't know a lot of the details. If there's any question, which there might be, because there's 9 of them, I'll go back and read it. But on the actual GMAT, if you read it the way I have read it, you would be absolutely fine. So, okay, moving on. And the next sentence starts with surprisingly. Okay, what is surprising now? Surprisingly, however, when we added a large amount of protein to the meal, brain tryptophan and serotonin levels fell. Okay, since protein contains tryptophan, why should it depress brain tryptophan levels? The answer lies in the mechanism that provides blood tryptophan to the brain cells. The same mechanism also provides the brain cells with other amino acids found in protein, such as tyrosine and leucine, whatever that means. The consumption of protein increases blood concentration of the other amino acids much more proportionately than it does that of tryptophan. The more protein is in a meal, the lower is the ratio of the resulting blood tryptophan concentration to concentration of competing amino acids, and the more slowly is tryptophan provided to the brain. Thus, the more protein in a meal, the less serotonin subsequently produced and released. That's the only sentence I understood, by the way, the last sentence. I have no idea about the middle part, the consumption of protein, this, that. It's just the first sentence and the last sentence I've understood, which is when rats were fed high amounts of protein, their serotonin levels fell. Then it tries to explain why it happened, which I have no idea, but all I gather in the end is if you eat a lot of protein, then the serotonin level goes down, which is released in your brain. That's all I have gathered. If there's any question from what is given in the middle, I'll go back and read it. Let's hope it's not there. So all I've understood from the passage is that it used to be believed that there is no connection between the brain and what is happening in the rest of the body, but it is now known in recent studies have shown that that is not the case. And then it gives you an example in the second paragraph of rats and experiments conducted on rats, which shows that there is a connection between what's happening in the body with what's happening in the brain. In the third paragraph, it brings in a new angle about protein and how protein depresses the levels of serotonin released in the brain. That's basically the entire passage for me. Do keep in mind one thing also that I've understood is, between the second and third paragraph, the third paragraph is basically getting a new angle into the picture. It's not really giving you any supporting evidence for the connection being there between body and brain. It's bringing a new angle, which is what protein does to serotonin in the brain. So do make note of that. If I have to think of the purpose of the author in writing the passage, it's absolutely neutral. He's describing some studies and the findings and all that. It's a neutral passage. So having understood the passage like that, I will now approach the question, starting with the first one, which is question 75. Which of the following titles best summarizes the contents of the passage? Okay, global question, should be easy. A says, neurotransmitters, their crucial function in cellular communication. The passage is not about the function of neurotransmitters. B says, diet and survival. No connection, honestly. C says, the blood supply and the brain are reciprocal dependent. I don't think so. D says, amino acids and neurotransmitters. The connection between serotonin levels and tyrosine is, again, it's there in the passage, but it's very narrow. The passage is much more than just this. So I think E should be the answer. I don't know what it says. Let's read it. The effects of food intake on the production and release of serotonin. Some recent findings. I think that's the best. That's the best because broadly the entire passage is about serotonin levels going up, going down with the kind of food you eat, and it is recent studies, recent findings. So E, I think, puts it together the best, and that should be the answer to our question.